Now, welcome back to the People's Mirror. In this episode, we want now finally to put before the mirror these statements that were made by Orengo, Osotsi, and Sifuna, having laid the ground on why they were made and their effect now to their supporters and now to the entire structures of the ODM party, the Luya unity, the bloc voting, and 2027 conversations. These people are important because just before we delve deeper into this particular analysis, it's important to remember how Raila and his team, while he was still alive, codified the leadership of this party. So of course, the party leadership was himself. The party chairperson was a governor from the Nyanza region, but there was also picking from Simbarati, from the Gusi community. There was picking of Junet in leadership positions of the National Assembly from the minority Kuria communities and the Migori area. There was a picking of Nasir, of course, from the Mombasa area. There was picking of Osotsi to represent the interest of the Luya areas, and this particular there was also Nanok sometimes back in the leadership of this party from the Turkana part. Just shows you how within the leadership of Raila Odinga there was need to diversify the leadership of this party, understanding very categorically and very importantly that the party membership was not limited to one particular tribe or one particular community. Now, this party that has fronted presidential candidates for 4 successive elections, being the only party that has done that in the recent 20 years, being 2 decades, and that is 4 elections, is now facing a decision in 2027 on whether or not to front a presidential candidate. In our just concluded episode, we have detailed the position of the party coming from the recent party leader currently, saying that if that decision is to be made, that they are supposed to front a candidate in 2027, that becomes the reserve of the party leader. Of course, this democratic space has not been known to be challenged previously because unanimously people would have decided to have Raila Odinga rally with the ODM party. If he was still alive, it was making those statements ahead of 2027. But certain members who now feel that the election, or rather the rising of Oburu to that position, was not a unanimous decision of the people, neither a creation of nature, because he did not create the party, feel that if this still remains the position of the party, that they cannot front any other candidate with the presence of the party leader until the absence of the party leader, then they are dissatisfied with the positions of the party. But dissatisfaction, is one thing compared to need to bolt out. And so they are saying that they're dissatisfied, but they're not leaving. You see, from the angle of Junet Mohammed and Opundo Kaluma, they feel like the people that do not support the broad-based government should give them an easy time, leave the party and join the Gachagua cohort immediately, and leave the party make its decision of leadership with Ruto in 2027 and beyond. They have made this very, very clearly in their statements and in their social media posts. But then there's also a section of these individuals that are now being told to go outside, who feel like they have really invested in this party, and so now that Baba is not there, they should not be told that if they are having different opinion with the senior members or other members who are already in this party and are in government, then they should see the door. They feel that they will not see the door. They will stay within the party and fight within the party until the party has a national position that favors both the people who are in government and themselves. And also as a result of that, 5 names were previously in conversation as names that are making the broad-based arrangement shaky, and that included Amisi, Babuino, Osotsi, Sifuna, and Orengo. But as it seems that with the latest political statements being made, both Amisi and Babuino are taking a different position with this particular decision and are approaching this particular decision differently from the other 3. Now, Amisi made statements at Jirungo's burial to the effect that he's not in the broad-based government and is not going to join the broad-based government, and he was just advising the people in broad-based government, of course, to implement the 10-point agenda, being what Raila and Ruto agreed upon. Babuino has made an absence in the media spectrum for quite some time, of course, because this shortly after Aladwa declared that he's also having interest for the position of the gubernatorial seat of Nairobi, and people saw it as a move from within the ODM chambers within themselves to actually sabotage Babu's success within the party and Babu's success to rising to become the gubernatorial, to become the governor rather of Nairobi in 2027. Babu Owino has kind of retracted from the Kenyan political scene for quite some time, not making statements to the effect of whether or not he's in support of the broad-based arrangement. But the three of these gentlemen have been repeatedly bold in making statements everywhere they go on the position of this particular arrangement. And in this episode, it would be fair to put for our viewers what they have said concerning their fate that is now being discussed not only in Kilgoris, but in the 2026 year as something that has been sealed and decided. So first there is, of course, Governor Orengo, then there is the Deputy Party Leader Osotsi, then there is the Secretary General of the party, Honorable Sifuna. And quickly, let's start with Governor Orengo. Governor Orengo's latest statements were made in the burial of Cyrus Jirongo, but prior to that, Governor Orengo has made a lot of statements concerning this government. Previously, his statements have been taken to actually allude to the fact that Governor Orengo was marshalling support for Kalonzo in this particular backyard. Now, critics of Orengo have now changed it from Orengo calling support for Kalonzo to Orengo calling for support for Uhuru Kenyatta. But it seems very categorically that Orengo might not be doing it for Kalonzo or for Uhuru Kenyatta, but Orengo is not in the broad-based arrangement with the Ruto post-2027. The reason for that, he says, is because of the struggle that they underwent to have multi-party democracy in Kenya. Now, Orengo, who was quoted making speeches at Jirongo's burial, said the following. First, he eulogized Jirongo in-depth, taking an in-depth look at Jirongo, saying that he recollects as early as during the 4 days when Raila was looking for a certificate ahead of vying for Langata constituency, and no one else was giving that certificate except Jirongo, and says that Jirongo actually played a very key role in the political rise of not only Orengo but of Raila. Of course, these are statements that are just rubbing on the statements that we had said yesterday, that Jirongo himself actually might have had an impact on creating both the fourth and the fifth president of the republic alike. So Orengo, after saying that, went ahead to say that the current arrangement of government was not sustainable. Orengo says that the region's call to work in government celebrates being in government. Now, this is what Orengo has always had a problem with. When he was talking to Mbadi, when he was talking directly to Wandai at the burial of Beryl Achieng, the sister of Raila Odinga, and now while he was talking to Mudavadi in the presence of these others at the burial of Jirongo. And he was saying that our people and our communities always have a problem with what government is. Says that there's a lot of representation in government, but when you come to the Kenyan spectrum and you give like 3 CS positions to one particular tribe, then they do not want to challenge that particular government irrespective of the policies that are wrong within the government, primarily just because they're in government. And Orengo has been on a media tour to sensitize communities and tell them for quite some time that being given or being dished out for some positions within government, including the CS positions, are not itself being in government. Now, you see, you would understand where Orengo is speaking from. If he was someone who has not been in such a position before, then you'd say Orengo is not really comfortable with the fact that he's not a CS under this regime. But you'd remember then quickly that Orengo was a minister when the Grand Coalition government was being formed. And Orengo, as a minister of lands, then had an opportunity to work in the ministry alongside other communities that were in the ministry then and understand how government works. And so he's among the people, other than being a member of parliament, having been a senator, having been in the ministry, as a minister, now a governor, is in an informed position to inform the Kenyan people on what way really to go and how governments working differ from governments dishing opportunities for just CSS and communities. Now, Orengo says that Luo and Luya must be in the conversation of 2027. Now, this particular statement needs to be taken in context. It's not a tribal statement in a blanket coverage, but it is aiming at the decision of conversations that are now being said were held in Kilgoris, that were held appeared in the president's ranch that was actually rearranging the leadership of the party and the positions of certain officials of the party, including Osotsi, Sifuna, and other Luo officials within the party, so as to create a conducive environment for Ruto's re-election in 2027. Now, Orengo says that these particular conversations around whether the ODM party will go alone or whether the ODM party will go with a coalition in 2027 have to be centered around one thing, around the fact that Luos and lawyers will be in that negotiation table and in that government come 2027. Orengo has now asked communities to stand firm and defend democracies and do not celebrate positions dished out to them. As I said in the beginning of this particular analysis, the biggest beef between Orengo and Wandai is the fact that he feels Wandai and the like celebrates the fact that they have been made cabinet secretaries to a very huge extent that they are even forgetting the people. Now, later on, when you take a look at what Wamboka said, which also perhaps will be part of this episode, you will see what members of parliament and governors are taking as a position if you compare to what the CSS in government are taking as a position of government. For members of parliament and governors, they feel like the cabinet secretaries who are in government right now are blinded by the resources that they are amassing under the current government, and they are thinking that when they amass those resources, then now it's a representation of their people. And most of their politics rotate around the fact of sensitizing the people that when 2 or 3 people are in power, it does not categorically mean that you as a people are in power. While the people in power are trying to use their closeness or proximity to power right now to defend themselves and portray themselves to their communities as the people closest to the power, and this being the perfect well of power to ever exist, to have pulled them now with their communities closer to power. The question is, are the communities feeling the impact of that, and are the communities going to vote in that particular pattern come 2027? Orengo further said that political parties are now being swallowed. In the presence of Mudavadi, who was actually sitting right there, Orengo told him that his party has been swallowed and is among the weak people who are now weakening the Kenyan democracy in that sense. He says that political parties are now being swallowed, including Mudavadi's ANC, which has since been swallowed into the UDA party. And he fears that if this particular pattern of people being dished out for political positions and considering themselves to be in power continues, then even serious political parties like ODM might find themselves swallowed ahead of 2027 major elections, which is our worry, that slowly as everything is happening, dismantling the ODM party, the UDA party is slowly absorbing the ODM party into its machinery to secure President Ruto's second term. And while this is happening, the party might not be destroyed on the public limelight intentionally, but might be weak that post President Ruto's second term, the party might not even withstand providing a presidential candidate. In an outburst, Orengo said that the police are lying, making people uncomfortable at Jirongo's burial. Orengo said and angrily stated that Jirongo's death was not a natural death, and that the police was lying from their analysis of that particular death. Now, Orengo's statements other than the ones that were aimed at Jirongo and the ones that were aimed at democracy, have been interpreted to be coming from the same playbook that, of course, Uhuru Kenyatta was speaking from, that there is no need to have all these 93 registered political parties bowing down to one particular political party, but there is a need to strengthen each and every one of them so that the spirit of democracy, which now they fought hard for, survives and springs in Kenya. Remember very well that in the key demonstrations that led to multi-party democracy and repeal of Section 2A, James Orengo's name plays a very key role as one of the people who are in the streets to make sure that that change happened. And so whenever he makes these statements around defense of multi-party democracy, strengthening democracy and strengthening political parties away from weakening them, it comes from someone who really fought for a space for political democracies to live and coexist with each other. But now it has been interpreted that they are speaking from the same book with President Uhuru Kenyatta, who now feels like there is need to defend these particular democracies at all costs, even if that cost means the people saying that he's involving himself in other people's political parties. Then comes Osotsi. Osotsi is currently the party leader, and as I said while I was beginning this part of the pod, Raila had an intention of spreading the leadership of the party across communities, understanding the contribution that these communities had made to his party one, and also understanding the voting bloc of the country. And Luhya becoming the second most populous voting bloc of the country, it was indeed important to have a deputy party leader coming from that area. Now, it's important to understand why Osotsi as a senator came to that particular position of leadership. It was not just a pick out of nowhere. Osotsi contribution to the party is actually one that is stemmed deeply. Now, Osotsi confirms that he is in ODM to stay. He said that very angrily, telling the lawyers that they have invested in the ODM political party since 2007, and so they're not going to leave. And so you see this statement of leaving comes after both Kaluma and Junet said that if you're not supporting the broad-based government within the arrangement right now, then they were giving you an option to leave. An option to leave meaning that you can join now the united opposition and go on with your politics away from them. Now, Osotsi, who has invested in this position to the level of a deputy party leader, something that both Junet and Kaluma themselves have not achieved, however loud they are within their own political party, now confirms that he is here to stay and they're not going to leave the party that they have invested in as Luhya people since 2007. Osotsi's assertion, of course, are coming shortly after the revelation of infights within the party, and these infights are as high as to the level that the Kilgoris meeting was sidelining certain key officials to discuss their ouster. Osotsi, who is a deputy party leader to the level of Nasir, did not attend the Kilgoris party meeting, and so he feels like the reason why perhaps he was not invited into that meeting as he can be stemmed back to his loudness when it comes to not supporting the broad-based arrangement. And so sources reveal that he was aware when he was making these particular statements of what had come out of that particular Kilgoris meeting. Osotsi now directly attacks Junet Mohammed, telling Mr. Mohammed that he comes from a minority voting bloc and confirms being ready to face challenges if they come. Excuse me. You see, Junet Mohammed is now the minority leader in the National Assembly. And to that effect, of course, when you compare the voting bloc of where Junet comes from to the voting bloc of where Sifuna and Osotsi comes from, then Osotsi and Sifuna have a louder voice within the party compared to Junet. Perhaps that's why Osotsi is even serving as the vice chair and Sifuna as the secretary general, and Junet is only just serving the National Assembly and not anywhere within the party hierarchies. So Osotsi has attacked Junet, directly telling Junet that Junet comes from a minority group and should not sit in discussions discussing the ouster of people who come from minority voting blocks when it comes to the fate of the ODM party. Osotsi is the deputy party leader, and of course Junet is accused of advising Oburu to make decisions without consulting the ODM party. This one, even Sifuna himself had a problem with. Sifuna publicly talked to Honorable Oburu Odinga and told him, not once, not twice, that it is very, very wrong to have certain officials or certain people from the ODM party advising Oburu Odinga, and Oburu Odinga going ahead to act upon those particular advice from those officials without consulting the entire team, which is the ODM team. So Osotsi, who is the deputy party leader, has also accused Junet of interfering with the structures of the party, advising the structures of the party without having any serious official positions within that party, and adopting positions with this particular advice of Junet without having the national delegation conference deciding on those particular matters. So it's now clear that Osotsi and Sifuna are in one room and they are not leaving the ODM party, while Junet and Wanga are on the other room, and also they are deciding that they're not leaving the ODM party. The fate is, where will the ODM party go? Will it go the Osotsi way and the Sifuna way, which is now being accused to be supported by President, of course, Uhuru Kenyatta, or will it go the Junet way and the Wanga way that is now affiliating themselves with Oburu Odinga and of course with the presidency of President William Ruto? These decisions are to be made by March this year, and after March this year, by the end of this year, they have committed through their party leader Oburu Odinga that the decision will have been made whether or not they are going alone and they have a presidential candidate, or whether or not they are going to go in coalition and they are going to join forces with other presidential candidates who are coming from other parties. And they're even saying that if it's a decision or a conversation of a coalition, then by the end of this year they will clearly have declared it for their members what the coalition is and the position that they are holding in that particular coalition. Now 2026 has just begun. We are on its second day, and this particular political heat waves are increasing. We are keeping a look at what is happening from the ODM camp, but intentionally we are keeping a look at what is coming out of these key individuals who are being sidelined. What is Osotsi going to do? What is Sifuna going to do? What's Orengo going to do? What's Amisi going to do? And what's Babu going to do? Are they going to bow down to the pressure that is coming from the other members of the party and join the ODM party for a major course in 2027, independent of their own ambitions? Or are they going to bolt out of the ODM party now that 2026 is here and we just have less than a year to the elections, and find camps in different other places and keep on building their political firebrands away from Raila Odinga's legacy? And as that happens and as it unfolds, ladies and gentlemen, the People's Mirror will detail and recap for you what happens in the Kenyan political scene as it unfolds. Keep it here until our next episode.